In this video, we're going to be talking about the social cognitive perspective on personality, as well as evaluate the trait perspective as a whole, as to whether or not that's, what are the positives and negatives to the trait perspective. If you're not sure what the trait perspective is, please go back and watch the previous video, as well as the video before that talking about humanistic approaches to personality, as well as our definition of personality. So to start talking about social cognitive theory, we should go back to our friend Albert Bandura from our learning unit. And if you remember, he was the guy behind the Bobo doll experiment, right, which showed that we learn through observation, right, that we learn through other people modeling behavior. And with that comes this idea of reciprocal determinism. Reciprocal determinism is the idea that our internal mental events, our external environment, and our overt behavior, how we're acting, all influence one another. That everything is kind of balanced, that the way we think, the way we're acting in the world, and the way that the world impacts us all has a sense on how we act, right? We act, to put it another way, we act the way other people act. Our patterns of behavior, our personality is really based off of our models, whether that's our role models or our family, or a personal hero or something. But it's all based off of, from Bandura's perspective, right, that observation component. So an example here could be if you watch your parents when you were a kid, they're buying a new car, they haggle, they kind of bargain assertively, to put it that way, but that results in them getting a good deal on a car. So you might remember that and act similarly the next time that or the time when you go to buy a new car, that you watched what other people did, you saw the result, and therefore you respond in a similar way. So social cognitive psychologists observe people in both real world scenarios and simulated scenarios, because why are we going to talk about like how we act, right, when we know that the environment plays a major role in how we act? More on that in a minute. But instead of trying to think about like, well, how would I act in the situation? Let's put people in those situations and see how they act, and that gives us a truer sense of their personality, right, of who they are and how they're feeling and how they're acting. The critics on this say that there's too much attention to the situation, right? That you can see that oh, I'm not normally assertive, but I'm assertive in this car negotiation. Well, that's fine, but like saying that someone's then assertive isn't necessarily the case, right? They might only be assertive in that one situation. So the criticism of the social cognitive perspective when it comes to personality is that there's too much of a role, too much of an emphasis on the situation, and not as much on the individual, their internal mental states, or how they view themselves in the world, or their self-concept, and all of those other things. So again, not necessarily bad things, just criticisms, right? Where are these things open for questioning? This kind of gets us into the role that the environment does play, and then how we perceive that role in our own lives. And that takes us to a really important set of terms that deal with what we call the locus of control. Okay, so a locus of control is, where do we believe control is located, right? Locus meaning like the point of where it is, right? And we can either have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. These are really important for us to understand. They almost always show up on an APFRQ. It's really important that we get these things correct in our minds. So as personality theories continue to develop and adjust over time, traits are still a dominant perspective here. But we also understand that the environment itself, right, our social situations, just the world, has an influence on our understanding and our idea of, can I control my environment, right? Am I the master of my own fate? Or am I kind of subject to the whims of what life throws at me, and I have no control over the situation? When we think about our ability to influence the environment, right, our greater environment, we really have these two things. The internal locus of control says that you are in control of your experiences and their outcomes. You have the ability, you are in the driver's seat. Yes, there's a lot of things going on, but at the end of the day, you control where the car goes and how to operate the car. On the flip side is you are the passenger, right? You do not have control over the situation. You are in the back seat. You're just along for the ride. And this kind of helpless attitude or this belief in chance or fate that's going to open up to you is an external locus of control. I don't want you to think that one is better than the other. They're just explaining where we put control in situations. People with a strong internal locus of control tend to be more outgoing. They tend to manage their stress well, and they're more likely to achieve their goals. Again, if I believe that it's in my power to, run for mayor, then I'm probably going to go forward and do that, right? If I think that that's a viable path, if I have, that goal set and I believe that I can control my actions and the environment around it that then leads to that happening, then I have an internal locus of control, right? I believe that the control of the environment rests within me. On the flip side, people with an external locus of control tend to be more realistic. They tend to be more attuned to the situations that they're in and how those situations affect their own and others' behaviors, right? Think about the person who's like speeding on the highway, right? Someone in an external locus of control might understand that, hey, maybe there's things going on that's what's causing them to drive erratically. That the role of the situation, right, does play a major part in how we respond to them, right? We act differently in different situations, which is what we're going to get to in a second. So it's important that you understand that an internal locus of control is the belief that you have the ability to affect the environment, where an external locus of control means that you don't. External locus of control is also important for things when dealing with mental health issues, anxiety, depression. Most importantly, seems a little counterproductive or counterintuitive, I should say. But if you think about it, right? Let's put it another way. You just failed a test. Okay, you just took a test. You failed. What feels better? You saying, "Well, it was all up to me, and I just let myself down. I didn't study. I didn't do any of the things that I should have done, that I know I should have done, but the test was fine. Teacher was good, but it came down to me and I just failed." Or does it feel better to say that test was impossible? The teacher didn't teach me anything. I did everything I could, but the world was against me, right? So having an external locus of control in some situations actually is way beneficial than an internal locus of control, because if you're depressed, right, if you're prone to anxiety and depression, then having that external locus of control can actually kind of free you in a way, right? Hey, it's not me and my failings. It's just kind of the way that the world is. And that takes some of the sting and the power out of, how we're feeling about ourselves and the world, right? If you're feeling worthless, well, that's an internal locus of control, right? Whereas if you kind of surrender that up to, this is just a crappy day and everything kind of went against me, and that's okay. That happens sometimes. And I don't have anything, I can't control that. That's an external locus of control, and that's much more healthy in those situations. So the way that we interact with our environment actually can change from scenario to scenario, right? You might have an internal locus of control on some things and an external locus on other things. The important thing to understand is that it is about where do you see the power. I'll give you a perfect example. I don't remember if it was my first year or my second year as an AP reader. External locus of control was one of the terms on the FRQ that I was grading. And it was very clear that the person, that in order to earn the points, you had to say that they believed that things were out of their control. If you said that it was not in her control, that was a lack of an internal locus of control and didn't score. So believing that things are out of your control is an external locus of control. It's not the belief that things aren't in your control. That's a lack of an internal locus of control. That seems real nitty gritty, but that's where they drew the line. So it's important that as we move forward, right, as we go into Walter Mischel and the person situation aspect that he was trying to kind of blend all of these things into a cohesive personality theory, it's important that you guys know internal locus of control. I'm in the driver's seat. External locus of control. I'm in the back seat, and it's where you believe the power to change the environment resides. Is it within you, or are you just along for the ride? If you have any questions about this, please let me know, because this is an important term, and these almost always show up on an FRQ, and they're certainly going to show up in the multiple choice section of the test. So let's talk about this Walter Mischel guy. Walter Mischel is a pretty famous psychologist. If you've ever heard of the marshmallow test, where you put a marshmallow in front of a child, like a 4 or 5-year-old, and tell them that if you wait, until I come back, I'm going to leave you in the room with this marshmallow. If you wait until I come back, you'll get a second one if you don't eat the first one. Walter Mischel wanted to know how well we can delay gratification. So he kind of made a name for himself with that. And what's really interesting is he then followed up with those children over time and found that those who were able to delay gratification had a much happier and easier life than those who kind of gave into the immediate temptation of eating the marshmallow. There's some great videos on this. I'll definitely share them if they're not already posted on Schoology. But for our purposes now, with our focus on personality, and that's part of it. But Mischel really wanted to kind of emphasize the more stable aspects of personality, right? Those traits, those enduring qualities that we have, with the power of the environment, right? So we know that the environment plays a major role in our personality. We also know that our traits are major drivers of how we act generally. So Mischel said, look, why don't we look at personality really as a set of if-then algorithms, right? If this is the situation, then I respond this way, which explains why some people act very differently, in school versus at home, or at a party, or whatever it is, right? I always find it interesting because, as a teacher, right, I get to know a number of students, right? I have 100+ students every year that I get to meet and spend a lot of my time with, during the school day and on trips and all these other things. But what's always interesting to me is that's only like a snapshot of who you guys are. And likewise, you're only really seeing a snapshot of who I am, right? Who I am is different in the classroom versus, on the, basketball court versus, how I am, in the Dominican Republic, right? That my personality changes depending on, what my situation is. Am I hanging out with friends? Am I with my parents? Am I in Mr. Burke's office, right? My personality is going to be slightly different depending on what I got going on. And that's really what Mischel is talking about, is that we respond to these different situations differently because, the environment plays a role in how we act. So this is maybe the most obvious thing, that we act differently in different situations. But if we're trying to think of a personality thing, right, where we have this overarching idea of who we are and how we act, well, changing from situation to situation kind of throws that idea kind of out the window, right? Like if I'm sometimes outgoing and sometimes reserved, well, what does that say about my personality as a whole, right? So it's important to understand that Mischel's trying to blend these two, right? The trait theories that, these are the general ways that we act, but we can act differently in certain situations. Right. So again, if we're looking at predicting behavior, then from Mischel's perspective, we shouldn't look at traits, because we respond differently in different situations. But to counter that, right, to kind of evaluate that from a different perspective and to put more weight behind the trait theorists, um, traits are pretty stable over time, right, from situation to situation, right? Even though some behaviors might be a little different, right, we see strong correlations among trait scores over, over our lifespan, right? At 7-year intervals, that you see these high correlations, especially once you hit adulthood. And middle adulthood, right? There really is, like, people are who they are and their traits matter. Um, they might be more or less outgoing, but if you're an outgoing person, you're always going to be more outgoing than someone who's reserved. Um, so if you're, I'm trying to think of the other ones. If you're relaxed, right, you're always kind of going to be a relaxed person no matter what's going on, right? Maybe in some situations more relaxed than others, but that trait kind of carries you through all the different, situations that you might be put in. So on one hand, we have, right, situations drive our behaviors. On the other hand, you have, traits drive our behaviors. Michelle's trying to figure out the combination of the two, and we have data that of course kind of shows both are correct. So that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about the biological basis of personality and how do we assess personality, right? All these personality tests. We'll probably spend a little bit more time in class talking about personality tests because I think they're interesting and we can kind of get into the nitty gritty of them. We will take one too on our first day back. I'll try to get them out. So we've been lucky in the past about quick turnaround times, but postal service is kind of really slow right now. So we'll see if we can get them back before the end of this unit. If I can get them mailed out, that Monday we come back. In this video, to kind of recap what we talked about Bandura's social cognitive perspective, social cultural perspective on how we respond to personality. We looked at the internal and external locus of control, and it's really important that we understand what those mean. And then finally, we wrapped up with Walter Mischel and looking at this controversy, if you will, between, are we more driven by our traits or are we more driven by the situation that we're in? And again, right, mixed results. Just kind of got to look at the data and understand the differences here. So any questions, please, have them written down. We'll talk about them next time we're together. And I will see you guys in the next video talking about the biological basis of personality and how we assess personality. Okay, I'll see you then.